Morning, beach walkers. We're here at Florida Oceanographic Coastal Center here in Stuart, Florida, right across from Stuart Beach. And we're going to talk to Mark Perry, who's the director of Florida Oceanographic, and we're going to talk to him about beach nourishment. So stay tuned. All right, good morning, guys. We're here with Mark Perry from the Florida Oceanographic Institute, and we're going to talk about beach nourishment, what it is, and what it is the purpose for it. So, Mark, what is the purpose for beach nourishment?
Well, as beaches are eroding kind of along our coastline, particularly along the east coast of Florida, the littoral transport of sand is from north to south. So we get about 250,000 cubic yards a year in our area that's moving and constantly moving. And if we get some major storm events, usually every couple of years, that really starts to take away some of the beach sand. And if the high energy moves that beach away, it moves it to deeper water and drops the sand there. So there are these offshore bars that are formed. And then during the summer months, some of those smaller energy waves bring that sand back up onto the beach. But not all of it may make it up onto the beach, and there may be more erosion due to severe storms that happen, and that it takes several years to recover any of that sand. Then over the years, they've been using different types of beach protection, if you will. There's been a whole effort in the early 70s, 80s to be beach armoring. They would put all kinds of debris along the shorelines in order to protect condominiums and things that are built not too close to the beach. They use setback lines to try to set back from the beach. But over the years, they realized any kind of armoring or any kind of hardening of the shoreline can really be destructive.
Is that like the geotubes that they use to
Right.
tub? Okay.
So in Martin County, they've kind of set back from saying any kind of armoring is not a good thing, and in the comprehensive plan it's still valid in there. Because once you armor the beach, then the section north or south of you is going to get eroded away even faster because of the acceleration of the wave energy hitting that armoring. Now they've tried different Durabags or different sand-filled bags, and if they're put in the right elevation at the right slope to the beach, they sometimes work, but not always. So the softest approach to helping the beach nourishment is to bring that sand from offshore that's been deposited off this high energy wave and bring that back onto the beach and nourish the beach. That's called beach nourishment. And of course, beach nourishment or re-nourishment has been controversial for many years about covering over live habitat such as exposed rock habitat or reef habitat. And so it's very tough, and then also for sea turtle nesting. They want to make sure that whatever beach nourished, you match the grain size completely with the right grain size that's on the beach already. Because if you put too big a size grains on there that's not matching the beach, it'll erode the natural beach away. If you put too fine a sediment on the beach, then that'll disappear quickly, and you won't be accomplishing anything. So it's finding out the right sand source offshore and matching that with the beach that's already there, and then doing it correctly so that it's not in turtle nesting season, so that it's loose enough to where turtles can nest again. And they've been really trying to work on how to configure these beaches so that it would be acceptable later on.
And what's the biggest problem with, do you think, with bathtub beaches? Because it seems to be eroding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I see it when I fish there. I mean, during the summertime, of course, it comes back.
Right.
In wintertime, of course, like you said, it's always moving because you got
Right.
northwesterlies, you got northeasterlies, they pulling the sand in and out. But do you think from putting the seawalls up, or is it just because we had that big hurricane years and years ago and they just haven't done anything to it? It just seems like Bathtub, out of all Martin County's beaches, is the one that always seems to be the big issue with beach erosion part of it.
Yeah, we did a coastal zone management study back in 1982, and that we looked at the coastal plain beaches up in Jensen and Stuart Beach, and then also down to Bathtub. You have the rock revetments and around House of Refuge, which is the Anastasia rock outcropping, and those are pocket beaches. And then you have Bathtub Beach, and Bathtub Beach, because of the reef offshore and because of the kind of configuration, it somehow gets these very different types of currents and current information there. So when you get these high energy waves from the northeast, it sets up this really strong littoral current right along the shore and can pull away sand very quickly. And so we have seen these extreme kind of fluctuations, even over the years since the 80s and 90s when we were looking at it. And it's when it get a huge storm like what happened, like you mentioned a couple years ago, really critically eroded Bathtub, and it never really recovered in a way. They tried Nourishment, they tried different things from the shoreline side, and that's still kind of not complete. And you know, it's very difficult. I don't know how to kind of configure that for you, but it's a really section of beach that fluctuates. Now you bring along some different housing that came in there. They built some rocks. They put rocks out in front of their thing, which might have accelerated a lot of erosion there. There are seawalls down south that are trying to protect those properties, and they got exposed and accelerated erosion around there. There was even a wall that was built back in the 70s that was totally covered with sand. The north property.
Oh, yeah.
And that wall was never exposed, but then when it got exposed, people thought, oh my gosh,
there was a wall.
Well, that wall was under several hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of sand, and then got exposed, and then they needed to remove it and take it out.
Correct.
So we've learned that any structures or anything there would really accelerate the erosion. So the best is if you can re-nourish the beach and not affect the reef, but have the toe of it come in there in that re-nourished beach and make that sand available for the system, the beach and dune system, all the way down, and hopefully in front of those seawalls so they wouldn't impact the seawalls, then it will. That's the goal, I think, of this current re-nourishment, and the way I've seen it and talked to the people there at Safety.
Now, is there also is there any other ways to save the beach without like pumping sand? And is there like ways of like maybe putting a buffer zone or like an artificial reef beyond the reef so it stops the energy from the waves coming in, or stops some of the energy, like you said, where the current comes in? Is there any other ways they're looking at as far as that goes?
Yeah, there was some what they call pep reefs, which they're made up of these concrete jack formations, and they were put up in front of DuPont's property down in front of there for a strip offshore in you know, about 300 or 400 feet from shore, in a kind of a long fashion parallel to the beach. And what that did was help break up some of the wave energy. But again, if you don't do it the full length and you don't have that kind of full length of beach, you're going to cause erosion on either side of that structure, even though it's offshore. But it will perch the beach out in front of that system. So it does work, and they have used it in other areas, but then they've ended up having, just like groins perpendicular, they'd have to build these submerged reefs over and over and over again up and down a long section of coast in order to make it effective. But again, it's that wave energy is kind of a natural thing that comes and goes, and the beach is more of a natural system that comes and goes with the system. And then the dunes themselves, if we get aeolian transport, meaning wind transport of the sand up onto the dune to build the dune, that's even better. But in our case, the coarse sand is very hard to blow, much unlike the beaches north in the Carolinas, for instance, that build huge sand dunes, or even on the west coast of Florida where the fine sand gets
Sanibel and all that, it's wide.
Right, so they get different things. And you mentioned also about other types of things, a way to, you know, whether there was enough energy in the system, or can you put different things up there to, they've tried dewatering the beach. There was a Dutch industry over
I'm sorry, what is dewatering?
Dewatering, when they, in the Netherlands, they've tried this, and they brought it over actually to Sailfish Point and tried it for a little section. It's actually putting pipes underneath the beach, the wet part of the beach. So as the waves come up on the sand, instead of taking the sand away, the way water percolates down, and they pump it out from underneath the beach and then put it back in the ocean. And so it's just taking the seawater out, putting it back in the ocean. But it by keeping that section of the beach drier, it keeps it from liquidating and moving, if you will. So that's what sometimes they've tried it, but in our section it just doesn't work as well. They've tried it on a couple of spots like down at Sailfish, and it's a lot of energy or pumping constantly. It's just
not cost efficient.
Not very cost efficient, and it doesn't dry it out
fast enough to do it
to kind of prevent that. So I'm afraid, you know, we're still very cautious phase about saying, well, let's just re-nourish beaches, but they have done a couple of times here in Stuart Beach for a 4-mile section. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes not. Sometimes the sand is dark and it takes time to weather out. Sometimes they don't match the grain size and it moves faster. And people question it because they say, well, this is just wasting money. You spend millions of dollars putting beach up there, and then we could have a storm the very next season and it's gone. And that's true, but some of these nourishment projects have lasted, 5, 6 years. So there are things you can do to, and the softest approach so far is kind of this re-nourishment aspect of getting that borrow site offshore, which is in fact what they're doing right now with this new St. Lucie Inlet management plan that they finally come to after 3 years, is to say, instead of just dredging it out of the inlet in the impoundment basin, putting it south on the beach, let's put it out into one of these offshore bar sites. That way the Jupiter Island can use it and North Shore can use it as well, and then it's not having to wait for turtle season either. They can do it during the winter or any time. It's because they're not affecting the sea turtle nesting on the beach. And then when it's appropriate to bring it on the beach during off sea turtle nesting, they can do that. And they're also agreed to move some of that sand that comes into the inlet, which from the north, to move it back up to the north and allow Bathtub Beach to be kind of have a little supply of
sand and stuff like that.
And the piping is already under the road and everything, so they've already
they hook up to it every year.
That,
Okay. And I guess they're assuming they're going to pump the sand to make it like it used to be, where it was higher up to that dune line.
Yeah.
Now, does sea grapes or anything, does that help to keep that that dune line intact, like you're saying, so the sand doesn't blow down?
Yeah, the intent is, especially if you're going to rebuild the dune and they're going to push that north dune back out and make more parking there. So they'll put the dune out and then they'll replant it. And they will, every nourishment project should have a replanting of the dune and the beach face, so that you have sea oats down below and you have sea grapes and other plants in there on the higher part. And the reason the sea grapes are there, or sea oats are there, is that their root system are rhizomatous and they hold the sand. Now, a smaller storm event might come and looks like it's eroding away, but some of that sea oats are
still holding it. Right.
And then, as you mentioned too, during even blowing events, when we get a lot of wind, the sand hits the sea oats and the vegetation and drops out and builds up the dune, and that's the way the dune actually
naturally
builds up. So we would hope by planting, not just putting sand there, but planting it too, after you've got the formation now, get those plants in, because that'll help hold the beach and it'll help, or the dune, and it'll help also build the dune over time.
Anything else you would like to conclude with?
We've tried all kinds of things like Christmas trees and beach fences, sand fences and all that, but we just don't, the best thing so far seems to be, let's get that beach shape in and mimic the same slope as a natural beach. You don't try to make it too steep or too shallow. And if you can, and you don't affect the resources around, like the reefs and things, then you're better off. You're just putting more sand in the system to allow it to naturally move and the way it's going to
build itself back up.
And hopefully, we learn from our experiences and but unfortunately we also get huge storm events like we can't predict, and if it wipes it all away, we're going to have to be back, because people want to live on the barrier island. They want to have the beaches and they want to have things right there on the barrier island, and we can't just pull back far enough and say let's everybody live on the mainland and forget about the beach. But they do have setback lines now. They didn't have years ago, but they do have setback lines, and they're required to keep back it far enough to where the sand
doesn't affect the dune line. Okay. We want to thank Mark Perry, because he's a very busy guy with a lot of stuff. So if you ever have a chance to come out here to Florida Oceanographic Center, it's right across from Stuart Beach, correct?
Right. Yeah. Stuart Beach at the Florida Oceanographic Coastal Center. We're open 7 days a week, and go online at floridaocean.org and you can check out the hours and the programs that we have.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.